Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the Understanding Fivefold Ministry podcast and videocast. Really excited that you could join us. We're going on this journey of explaining and expounding on the fivefold. I'm really excited about this journey because I'm doing something I've never done before, and that is I'm interviewing friends about this subject. So this whole podcast is going to be a multi-voice teaching. We've got three different speakers, and they're all going to bring different perspectives. And because really, as leadership is not teaching people what to think, but how to think. And I want to really encourage you through this podcast to encourage you how to think about the prophetic and bring different perspectives, bring different ideas to you, so you can really decide for yourself what you think about this subject. Which is why I didn't want to teach it all by myself. I wanted to bring my friends in, and we could explore and have fun together. So Jesus did ministry with his friends, and I like doing ministry with my friends too. So today I'm welcoming my friend Steve Jones from the UK. I've known Steve a number of years. Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to see you too, man. So thank you for just coming in and joining in this conversation today.
Absolutely. Excuse me. still having my breakfast. It's great to see you. And I love the way technology can keep us connected, Ed, because obviously you are how many hours ahead of us?
I am 6 hours ahead of England.
6 hours, yeah. So
yeah, it's
I've
beautiful.
Just woken up and you're about to go to bed.
Well, not quite, but nearly. Yeah, definitely. No, I do love
raining here.
It's raining. It's always raining in England. It's always raining. That's nothing new. Doesn't rain as much as Manchester compared to Exeter, but it certainly rains. No. So no, I sent you this list of like subjects around the apostolic, and we sort of settled this and then just sort of having a general conversation about what is fivefold. That's an expression that we use in church, in certain parts of church a lot. Other parts of church don't use that at all. What is fivefold? Who is fivefold? I just want to have that exploration. So when I say what is fivefold, what's your understanding of that, and what's been your journey with that? And just let's go for it. Explore.
Well, for me, it does start actually in Ephesians 4, as obviously it does for many of us. That idea that the church is maturing and needs help. We need as much help as we can get to become this wonderful bride of Christ. And so I go back to that amazing text in Ephesians. I don't know if you've ever read it out, Ed. It'd be good to just
let's
read
it out.
Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, that's what got me going on the journey of thinking about fivefold ministry, is very much this scripture. So Christ himself gave, this is Ephesians 4:11. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. I mean, Ephesians is full of this wonderful picture of the body of Christ, just kind of glorious, really. I mean, it's in the name of your ministry, that kind of glory in it, and that sort of idea of growing towards maturity. We need as much help as we can get. And it says here that Christ has given himself, and he's given us also these wonderful people, and this wonderful flows. And I think it's so crucial, actually. I think regaining fivefold ministry is a real key part of what God is doing at the moment in the world. It's a little bit like we've always had these 5 incredible tools in our toolbox, and for many years we've just ignored them. Or we've just picked 1 or 2 of them out. And classically, the pastor, the teacher have been the 2 that we've picked out, and we just sort of ignored the others. Certainly some traditions have ignored all 5. Some traditions have taken 2 of those out, and some traditions have taken all 5 and started to play with those as well. So it's this wonderful thing, and God is there, isn't he, with this toolbox? He's holding it out and saying, here's a gift. But we need to learn how to take hold of these wonderful people, these wonderful flows of life,
Yeah.
flows of the spirit, and firmly embrace them. Yeah.
Yeah, just picking up on, I think you highlighted something that we all know to be true if we've been in church more than 5 minutes, is that the church has historically emphasized on the pastor teacher, a
Yeah.
little bit of evangelist, and then the other two we've just really forgotten about, and we've kicked the evangelist out of church. And why? What in your journey and experience? Why do you think there's been a focus on a couple of them and an ignoring of the others? What do you think that's about in your experience and your journey?
Okay, I think there's two things there. One is the sort of the pastor and the teacher. What is their focus? It tends to be particularly on the believers and their nourishment.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it's an entirely selfish kind of trait within us all. We want to pay for people that are going to do stuff for us.
Come on.
Sadly, I think that,
Yeah.
sadly, I think that, and actually, if you think about the evangelist, the apostle, the prophet are all out there doing things for other people, particularly. Shouldn't be like that, but it seems to be that we've invested in the ministries that are the things that give us the feel good factor. Not to put down pastoral or teaching ministry. I think they're really important. But I think that might be part of it. I think the other thing is those three roles, are quite edgy. They're quite, they're controversial. Being a pastor, loving people, it's not that controversial in a way, is it? You can't go wrong with just loving people. But actually, prophetic stuff, apostolic stuff, setting up new things, evangelist stuff, kind of sharing the gospel in all kinds of creative ways. It's a little bit more controversial. It's a harder territory, and so people have tended to pull back from those three ideas, I guess. So yeah, those would be my two arguments, I suppose.
Yeah.
For why we've lost these three. And yet Paul says, he does talk, it's not just in Ephesians, is it? There's other scriptures where Paul particularly talks about the apostles and the prophets being actually the foundation on which the church is built.
Yeah.
Which is a really strong thing to say, but it's actually saying we're missing some of the core things to build the church upon. So restoring the fivefold ministry to me is one of the major needs of the church today.
Yeah, that's the scripture you're thinking of, Ephesians 2:20, when it talks about the fact that the founder of the church on the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ being himself the chief cornerstone. But yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So that's sort of that. But so what is it? Who is it? What's it all about, Steve? Why is it so important? Just lots of questions at you, and I'll just let you run for it.
Yeah. I think firstly, it's about maturity, and maturity is about growing in different areas of our lives, isn't it? If you're going to become a mature human being, you're looking to develop your body in a mature way. You're looking to have mature emotions. You're looking to have a mature kind of developed mind. It's this like holistic growth of a human being. So if you can think of the church a little bit like that, we need actually to grow in lots of different areas. And I suppose the fivefold ministry is helping us grow in that sort of rounded and holistic and complete way. So each one of those, I think this is answering your question, but each one of those fivefold ministry gifts focuses on a particular part of the body. And if you take out even one of them, you're going to have an unbalanced or a slightly dysfunctional church, so the more of those you take out the equation, the more dysfunctional you're going to be. So if you want a functioning, glorious, Christ-like church, you've got to bring all these in. So I guess the question, pastor, particularly loving people and caring for people, shepherding people, teacher, sort of obviously training and helping people, evangelist, sharing the gospel, apostle means the sent one, the person that's been sent, founds things, the prophets kind of saying truth, speaking truth and helping us forward and hearing from God. So you've got this wonderful, if you actually take all five of those, it does bring a real maturity to you as an individual. So welcoming these ministries into our own lives is really important as well. But back to the Ephesians 4 stuff, it's all about equipping the saints. In the authorized versions of the Bible, that's what it says, equipping the saints. It's really interesting that I know many people out there would have been touched by the Vineyard Movement and John Wimber and
Yeah.
people like that. I know I have.
Mm.
And his magazine for the whole Vineyard Movement was originally called Equipping the Saints.
Oh, wow.
The whole thing. It's not about attaining a role. It's not about attaining a sense of position. It's actually a very humbled and humbling role that we need to serve. So if people out there aspire to any of these 5 things, actually you're called to serve, to equip the saints. And that probably means for many of us that we get off platforms rather than get on them. This is my controversial bit here, Ed.
Okay, excellent.
So often we go for the role, and that inspires us forward. I am a prophet, or I am a pastor, or and I know personally I've used those kind of as real identity things in my own journey. There's just, and yeah, it inspires us forward, and that's good. It's good. I don't want to cut that down too much, but actually the more we put into that kind of sense of role, Steve the pastor, the more, for a start, I'm not able to break out of that at any given moment. Everybody will always call me the pastor.
Yeah.
What happens if God calls me to be an evangelist in a few years, or God calls me to be more apostolic or more prophetic? So people are going to box you in if you roll yourself.
Yeah.
But also God works with us, in seasons. But also, I just want to throw this in again. It's another controversial one. That it's actually a very dangerous thing as well, fivefold ministry, because it can stop us hearing from God in that breadth. So if we actually, let's say, Steve the evangelist.
Yeah. What
happens if I feel prophetic? What happens? What do I block that out? Do I say, no, I'm called to evangelism? Or is there such a thing as a hybrid? Is there such a thing as a hybrid? This idea of apostolic prophet, or apostolic, or even prophetic, or even not even using the noun, going more for the verb. And I think there's an awful lot in that. I think, and that's my controversy that I want to throw in, that actually the idea of using it as a verb is actually more releasing than actually calling it as a noun. So I am apostolic, I am evangelistic, but I'm not an apostle, I'm not an evangelist, I'm not a pastor. It just frees me up to be in the flexiness of the life of the Spirit, because the life of the Spirit, we don't know where he's blowing. We don't know what the blow is. So it gives us that sense of, we can move and shift with God over time.
Yeah.
Which is really powerful.
I know for me, and when I started in ministry, in church, so this is 1996, people didn't use apostle and prophet titles, but they were focused on the noun instead of the verb, as you were saying. And then through this journey of 25 years, I found when people would ask me, well, what are you, Ed? Because at times I would do different things. Sometimes I would be a bit more evangelistic. When I started ministry, I was much more evangelistic. Other times I became more pastoral. And then the past 6 years, the prophetic has been very strong. And people would say, well, what are you? And I would describe myself as this. It says I'm a Swiss Army knife. I'm a little bit of everything depending on what's needed in the situation. And what's been really interesting in that journey, when I've traveled across the globe, you stick me in England, I become much more evangelistic. You stick me when I went to Australia, I was much more pastoral. In Thailand, I've been much more prophetic. And it's almost like what I've been around has pulled something out of me, rather than me deciding who I am.
Wow. That's great, isn't it? And I think that's something about Paul saying you would become all things to all men, or a little bit like the incarnation, becoming Jesus becoming a man, becoming part of taking on the form of what's around him, that kind of sense of incarnational ministry. And that's what you're talking about there, isn't it? Kind of going to a place, feeling what God is already doing there, and basically just saying, God, I'm willing to be any of those 5, or hybrids, and have seasons doing this and seasons doing that. And I mean, that's quite a mature way of thinking. I think what we're talking about is actually, because in order to be able to function in all five, you actually have to have experienced all five. So more as a specialist. So it's almost like you need to go through seasons of each of these to kind of understand, and then you get to this place where you're able to pull a tool out of the toolbox, depending on your context.
I know for me, passion has been the biggest driver. At different times my passion has pushed me into an area, whether it was evangelism or the prophetic. So it's been more of an internal drive at times, not an external identification, but more of an internal thing that God was doing. So
cool, that's really good. So it's just it's a servant ministry. It might. I just got a friend of mine that calls himself a hidden apostle.
Okay.
Which I quite like that. I quite like that a lot, actually. The idea of, and Paul used to talk about that, about his apostolic ministry. It was actually full of suffering, full of pain and rejection. I mean, he went through seasons when nobody liked him, and everybody just thought he was, I don't know. That's Paul, the bald-headed guy. Apparently, he had a bald head, so
praise God.
All right. but this idea that Paul, that the journey of any of these is going to be painful. So we need to look at these in a sober sense. If we truly want to push forward in these things, we have to count the cost before we go forward in them.
And I suppose that's the division in the gifts again. When we think about the pastoral teacher, we think of something that's more inward focused. Much, as you said, it's easy to, if you love people, you ain't going to go far wrong. You know what I mean, in that sense. But as the apostolic, prophetic, and the evangelist is actually pushing the edges of the church out further, which always leads to misunderstanding, and which always leads to challenging the status quo.
Yeah, and that's why the interconnectedness of these things is so important. Very rarely do I see fivefold team. Very rarely, where I've seen it. I think I've seen it once or twice in my whole life, where you've got a functioning team where they've really got nearly everything there, and it's just a beautiful thing. I mean, this church that I'm thinking of particularly was in London. A beautiful church, multiracial, multi-gifted, multi-gendered team. It was just this beautiful team, and that was their peak. And actually, what happened in the end was the pastor fell out with the prophetic. The prophetics fell out with the pastorals, and that's a classic thing that tends to happen, isn't it? I know that was some of the history in the Kansas City prophets and so on.
Yeah,
this kind of continuous tension. Can we make it work? And so there needs to be real understanding about these sort of fivefold ministries. And that's just about understanding other people. So there are built into these five, there is a lot of tension, but it can be creative tension in those relationships.
So what are the five? So let's define this really clearly. When we think of those five gifts, what are they? Because you talked about them being specialists and specializing. So what are those guys or girls? I use that in a non-gender sense. What are they focused on? What is, and just. Yeah.
Do you want to take one at a time and just
go?
I would also, before we get into this, and this might help us in our conversation. I would also want to throw out that many of these terms are really loaded. Apostle is so loaded, not just in the church, or even using the word apostolic, but actually out there in the world. And the same with prophet, and the same with evangelist. It's really interesting that how these words are perceived in the wider world, isn't it? Although with my business, I frequently talk to evangelists, but they're not Christian evangelists. They've been called brand evangelists, or for their business or whatever. That's fascinating. That some words have actually become quite trendy. A lot of companies have evangelists employed, and they're just sharing the news of they tend to be the media, the social media people, just sharing the story that business, whether it's Apple or whatever, the evangelist, or HubSpot, which is another business I work with. So yeah, I think we just need to be really careful with language. And people would say, well, we need to redeem back, the word apostle and keep using it and keep using that word prophetic. But I would want to throw into the mix, and again, this is controversial, Ed, but I think you wanted a bit of controversy.
Yes, definitely.
So whether we need to just use metaphors, particularly if we're going to talk about this to the wider world, use metaphors and phrases and that perhaps people can connect with. So let's take the word apostle, okay? Rather than somebody saying, I'm Apostle Steve, how can we kind of just take that out and make that more culturally relevant, more culturally helpful for the people in the church and outside the church, So the idea of, well, let's get to it. What is it? It means the sent one, the one on a mission. Some denominations use the word missioner, fair enough. An apostle is also somebody that creates foundations and draws teams and creates teams. So in a way, they're a facilitator. There's another word I just want to throw out, or facilitating. Let's use the verbs facilitating. Or another one that I've played around with is, well, actually, this is not one you're going to put on your CV, but a spiritual horticulturalist, in that sense that you are, that I love that metaphor, because Jesus used that metaphor a lot, doesn't he? The gardening metaphor.
Yes.
The idea of just going around and gardening. I think that's a wonderful metaphor for apostle. Catalyst. If you know, a catalyst is another metaphor for what I think is apostolic ministry. A catalyst is just if you have two chemicals, and they don't normally mix together. A catalyst is the third chemical, just a very small one, a hidden one that you drop into the mix, and then it all starts going. But without the catalyst, even though it's the smallest substance in the mix of three, you drop it in, and you only have to drop it in once, and the thing starts happening. The reaction starts happening. So a catalyst is something that goes in and just things start happening around them, So again, that's a wonderful metaphor for apostolic ministry. And it would be one that the wider world would certainly understand a little bit. I see that on people's titles all over the place. I'm a catalyst. I'm involved in being a catalyst. So another one was activator. I love that one. The job is to go into a situation and activate something. I think that's super. I think that's something of the God in that one, because, that idea that you can go in and just, and you can relate to this, Ed, I'm sure, you go into a situation and you just, something in the spirit activates through what you're doing. And so you're an activator. So I guess prophetic ministry might be activating as well.
Yeah.
There's these lovely little phrases. I could go on and on about how we can use sort of contemporary metaphors. Yeah. Many of them actually have come from a biblical basis, and how the Bible has affected the wider world, actually.
Yeah. And if we think about metaphors, Paul used metaphors for his ministry all the time. He talked to himself as being an architect. He talked about self being a mother or a father. He described himself both with the mother and the father, which I find really interesting. So obviously Paul wasn't too much of a chauvinist, despite what we think about him. If he was comfortable enough to identify with that, And so I find it really interesting when you talk about metaphors here that some people from a more traditional New Apostolic Reformation background may hear that and go, well, but actually when I'm reflecting on that, Paul used metaphors all the time to describe his ministry. To the idea, going back a few minutes ago, of becoming all things to all men that I might save some. So I think there's a real value in this, because sometimes these words have become, they're loaded words, like you're saying.
Yeah. So we just need to be really careful and think about the words we use, and the fact that there are some new words we can get hold of. Evangelist, storyteller. I think that's wonderful. That's what an evangelist is, telling the Jesus story. Absolute storyteller. The prophet. There's many prophetic actions going on in our world all the time. Performance artists. When they go and do art on the street and stuff, and it's got like a social kind of purpose, if you like. That's speaking something. So many prophetic people tend to be quite creative. So there's a whole something about being an artist. One I use for myself, which I find is kind of more pastoral, is a road maker. It's kind of pastoral. I'm there to help people find a way forward. and that's a mixture of pastoral and apostolic, I guess you could say that.
Yes.
That's a good combi, by the way. I feel that's a well. I'm biased because that's my combi, but that's my little hybrid that I enjoyed. But pioneer as well is a phrase used by some for apostolic ministry and for evangelistic ministry. Spiritual entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Concept.
I think this is going to be this is my controversy I'm throwing into the mix now. I think really business entrepreneurs that excel, I think, are undiscovered apostles.
Yeah,
I think there is something in the pioneering of business, in terms of doing something new and innovating that ties into the apostolic. And I think it's the same gifting, it's the same anointing, it's the same grace, it's the same verb in action. It's just either directed into business or directed into business and they're unconscious because they're not awakened to who they are in Christ. But yeah, I don't feel any controversy to say that I think Steve Jobs was both a prophet and an apostle into technology. Now he may not have acknowledged Jesus, or I don't know where he ended up in his journey, but I don't think these things start when we welcome Jesus into our lives. I think these go. There's something that's different. So that's my controversy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'd agree with that, Ed, very much so. So I think these things are really just important to rediscover for a new generation. Rediscover these incredible words, and maybe just reframe them a little bit, and free them up to be. I've found it helpful to be hybrid, not just 2, 3, and to be seasonal as well. I think that's been super for me. To have that kind of sense of seasons. I think I've had the seasons in most of them. Can I just say as well, another metaphor or another symbol? I don't know whether some of your other contributors might share this as well, but the idea that apostolic ministry has been described as the thumb.
Yeah.
You probably heard this before, Ed, but I find this quite useful because a thumb needs to understand and be able to, it's the only one, isn't it, that can touch all the other 4.
Yeah.
So evangelism, pastoral teaching and the prophetic, in a way, the apostolic ministry needs to understand or have tasted the other 4 in order to bring real maturity. So they do need to be a bit of a generalist. And that would be another word I would throw out, apostolic generalism.
So, yeah. And if you think about, Acts 13, Paul and Barnabas were among the prophets and teachers, and God released them into the apostolic from that.
Yeah. You mean they weren't originally seen as apostolic?
No, they weren't seen as apostolic, and that's something that the church. I see this is, I think, the noun and verb thing is that the church in the New Testament didn't give nouns out. It endorsed verbiage. It endorsed action. It endorsed fruit of. Paul said he was an apostle. Paul knew he was an apostle from the moment he saw Jesus on the road. God had revealed that to him. But it took about 17 years for the church to catch up to that. But he was still doing the thing that God had put inside of him, and he wasn't caught up with the title in that sense. So
yeah. I mean, we need to search our own hearts for this. We really do. Why do we use that phrase apostolic? Is it just to make us feel good? And actually, if you're really willing to go down the apostolic route, are you willing to be hidden? In fact, for the rest of your life. In fact, there may not be any fame at the end of it. The only fame is the heaven bit,
Yeah.
So, are we willing to seriously not see this as a bridge to status or a bridge to kind of human glory, but actually just that's who we are.
Yeah.
So we've got to be really careful with calling ourselves any of these. But actually, verbiage, I love that word. Is that an actual word?
I think it is. I think it is a real word.
That's a great word.
If it's not, it needs to be from this moment on. But I think it is a real word.
Yeah. So I like that, the verbiage.
Yeah, and that's what God endorses. God endorses movement. And the church should endorse movement. That if we need a title or a position to feel confident to do what we feel God is saying to do, then I don't think we've got a really full revelation of it. If we need the endorsements to do it to
Yeah.
start with, we need to be that pioneer, to be that catalyst, the one that, when, the old Steve Jobs advert, the crazy ones, the pioneer, that what is status quo now was controversial 25, 30 years ago or 100 years ago. And it takes someone to be to do something without a precedent.
It's really hard, actually, though. This calling is really hard, isn't it, Ed?
Yeah.
I mean, I've struggled with this a lot. I look around at the friends who are pastors and have been ordained pastors, even though I've led churches and all kinds of things. I've never been, ordained.
Yeah.
And sometimes you in the as you're on your bed at night and you just kind of it does get to you. You'd love actually to be affirmed in that way. That's when I've had a bad day. on a good day, I think, I don't need that affirmation. God has called me here. The only affirmation I need is God's calling. And a few people around me would be really nice as well. And that's right and proper. But actually, we don't particularly need these names, these titles. God has called us to do something. We get on and do it, and we become the people that God has called us to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a hard one. If you're going to give away that title or not have it, you're going to have to find your sense of identity somewhere else. And in a way, it forces us into a lovely dependency on God, actually, doesn't it? In a sense, no longer can we rely on being called pastor or prophet or apostle. I'm just going to rely on that God has called me. And whether that means to be hidden for the rest of my life, that's fair enough. I'm going to pay the price of the calling to these 5 things. So that's just something personal from me. It is not an easy journey to put aside title in order to deeply flow into these. But that's how Jesus didn't have a title, did he, as such? In fact, when people tried to titleize him, he tended to push it away.
Well, the rich young ruler. Good teacher, what must I do to inherit into? Why do you call me good teacher? No one's good but God.
Yeah.
Totally. That's good.
Yeah, and other people, asking him, and he turns it back. Well, who do you say I am? So he refused to be labeled as such in that way. So he's always, and this is the wonder of Jesus, and this is the Philippians 2 thing, that even though he was God, he actually turned it on its head and became man, became a servant. There's a powerful passage, isn't there, in Philippians 2 where it talks about that. And so you call usurp is the wrong word. There's a lovely word where you turn something upside down.
Yeah.
And it is an upside down kingdom, isn't it? The kingdom of God. When we think we're getting somewhere, actually we need to be turning it upside down. But Jesus was like that. Whenever people wanted to put him on a throne or to glorify him in any sense, he always turned it on its head. And perhaps did the opposite, just to show him that he would not be titled. He would actually he would just serve.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah. So I think we've sort of apostolic, I think, so when we think of the others, prophetic, evangelist, pastor, teacher, I think we've got a good idea of what, from your perspective, what an apostle is: a catalyst, a pioneer, a builder, a spiritual horticulturalist, to coin a phrase. So
catchy, innit?
It rolls off the tongue really well. So let's just think about the other ones, and just give that a bit of definition from your perspective, if you don't mind.
Okay. Teacher next.
Yeah, sounds good.
Again, this is another one where it needs to be usurped. I'm going to use the word usurp. It might not even be that word, but it needs to be turned on its head, because teacher can be very much top of the pyramid. I share what I think, and it goes down to everybody else. So there's this sort of pride around it, and we've got to be careful. Again, remember, the teacher is there to equip the saints, to serve people. So I think the idea and of training, or training's a wrong word as well, but just of equipping people is very much a grassroots thing, and very much about helping people just become who they are, and teaching scriptures, but helping other people, empowering other people to learn more about the scriptures themselves. So not just telling people what the truth is, but actually equipping people to find the truth for themselves. So that's actually a really important kind of upside downness here. It's like when Jesus used when he was asked questions, he could have stood up and said, yeah, like we were saying then, this is the truth, this is and so on. But actually, he always used to ask questions back. So I think the model of teaching needs to be looked at. That actually people learn truth better if you actually turn it upside down and say, well, what do you think? And trust the Spirit a little bit, and trust the scriptures, their understanding of the scriptures, to kind of enlighten them. So I think part of the teaching ministry is not just to teach truth, but actually to equip people to be able to discern their own truth. And I think that's really quite key. So again, it's humility.
So instead of seeing the teacher as the final authority of this is my word, actually a teacher is a facilitator of learning, of enabling people with the skills through questioning, through more of a coaching style, to help them find an answer.
Yeah. I mean, Ed, that to me, I absolutely agree with you. But I'm sure people out there will be thinking, well, Ed and Steve, they're just obviously taking new ideas and putting that into their teaching mode.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at the way Jesus did it, 2,000 years ago, and the whole culture there around teaching was very much about being among and hanging out with people. So that you see that in the Gospels, don't you? Jesus spent time. We see these teaching episodes as like, that was what Jesus did. He used to stand on little mountains and talk to big crowds.
Yeah.
But actually, that's only a snapshot. Maybe he did that a handful of times.
Yeah.
But actually, the 3 years was all about hanging out with people, teaching them in conversation, teaching them in discussion, facilitating things like you're saying, coaching people. I mean, just because we're using these words that just facilitator, coach, doesn't mean actually the concepts are new. They're not new. Jesus was very much in the mode of coach, facilitator, a conversationalist, all these kind of words that we use today, but Jesus was in that mode, and that was the mode of teaching in his day. So I don't think we're just talking about a capturing there of a kind of a reinterpretation in a modern way.
No. Years ago, I listened to a guy called Dr. Howard Morgan, who was a Messianic Jew, and he talked about how, from a Jewish Hebrew perspective, they study the scriptures. They study the scriptures around a table with food, and they ask questions of each other and of God.
There we go.
And he the picture he gave us is of the scriptures is everybody's in a circle around the scripture. The scriptures are the diamond in the middle, and God's Spirit is like the light that comes in and refracts. And over here I'm seeing pink, but you may be seeing blue. And just that multi-voiced aspect. And he said that's a really big thing within Hebraic rabbinical style.
Yeah.
And so I think really that when we think of these gifts, we're dealing with the westernization sometimes of these gifts, because these gifts came from an Eastern perspective, which is very different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Living in the East right now, it's very different.
Yeah, you'd understand that more than most, and that's the teacher. So I think the teaching, again, you need a whole usurping of that kind of. It needs to be turned on its head.
Yeah.
So if we've got these pictures of big fancy teachers, people just are not listening anymore to that. It needs to be done in other ways. And actually, truth. Yeah, I've rabbited on enough about that, but you need to find your own truth, don't you? You need to find. Very rarely have I actually grown as a Christian through listening to preaching. or listening to teaching. I've grown as a Christian by listening to the teaching and then going and applying it, and then having conversations with people about it, and then perhaps hearing it again in a few weeks' time, and this sort of, so teaching is a process, not just an event.
That's good. Teaching is a process, not just an event.
Yeah,
I think that's good.
And not just a person.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Do you want to go on to the next one?
Let's
are we
do
going
another
through
one.
them all, are we?
Yeah, let's just summarize them, and I think this will give everybody a good overview from your perspective, because I think it's really, because that's what this whole series is about, is getting different perspectives on these gifts. So yeah, that's great. Okay. So let's do another one.
Yeah, let's do evangelist, shall we?
Let's
start there and
let's go
think about that one. Remember back to Ephesians 4, it's about equipping the saints. So again, we've got a bit lost in that, haven't we, in a sense that the evangelist to us, what do we see? Perhaps just a handful of people we know who are evangelists, each one of us. And what do they tend to do? Well, they tend to do evangelism, what we see as evangelism, whether it's big events or whatever it is. But actually, the whole focus of evangelists should be about equipping us to do the work of evangelism, shouldn't it? So again, it just needs to be turned on its head and brought back to its original purpose, which is equipping the saints. Occasionally you have people that are really good at communicating the gospel, which is super, but and have that gift of storytelling. But again, just bringing it back to equipping the saints.
So instead of these people doing the job of teaching and doing the job of evangelizing, they're actually equipping and releasing people and helping people do that for themselves, rather than them taking that place.
Yes and no, but because they do have to kind of live it as well, don't they? Like I had a good mate I was on the phone with yesterday who carries the cross around the world. If you know Arthur Blessett, he's like Arthur Blessett's little brother, spiritual brother. He's sort of the British equivalent of Arthur Blessett. Oh, you know him, Lindsay.
Lindsay, yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, so I was on the phone with him yesterday. He's a lovely man, and he's kind of got this. So he models this by going around the world with his cross and sharing the gospel. But he actually spends most of his time now just going around churches, helping churches, in their evangelism, in their day-to-day evangelism, and so on. So there is a time to do it as an evangelist, but there's a bigger time to actually teach others and train others, equip others.
So it's not getting so let's try and clarify this. It's not getting solely caught up in the task, but for yourself, but spending some of your time helping other people get involved in that task. And maybe that will be different at different times. Maybe at the beginning you're doing that solely, but maybe as you transition and grow in it, you're doing that less and you're helping other people more do it. So
I think that is the case, isn't it? And that's the model that Jesus used. He first of all showed people how to do things. Then he had people alongside him. So he said, come and have a go. And then he sent them out. So there's a little acronym, isn't it, called MAUL? I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Okay.
One, Ed. So M for model. See if I can remember this. So Jesus modeled it first.
Model.
A for assist.
Assist.
So come on, disciples, you can help me out on this. MAUL would be sorry, the W would be what would the W be, Ed?
I don't know. This is your acronym, not mine, mate.
Well, I'll have to make one up. It should be more of an S actually, but then it would be Mazel, and that wouldn't be very good. But model, assist. Let's say it's an S. I'm going to change this acronym.
That's okay.
Send. He then sends them out. And then eventually L is leave, and Jesus left. So there's this progression. And I think all of us need to have that built into our ministries, particularly evangelists. Model it. Have people assisting you in it. Then send people out in it, or W, whatever that stands for. And then L, leave them to it, because then they're not dependent on you. And Jesus very much obviously left. Sent his spirit, but did leave.
Yes.
So that's good. I think that's really, really, really important for all ministry. That MAUL or Mazel.
Mazel, as we've called it, Mazel. Your research for today's podcast has been incredible. Mazel tov and all that. No, and
Yeah.
I think, one thing because obviously, I'm a teacher in high school, junior high
Mm,
here in Thailand, as well
hmm
as everything I do, which my
mm,
life is very crowded right now. And the one thing
yeah.
I always, because I showed my kids the research for this, that if you just
Mm,
hear something, you're maybe going to remember X amount. But
mm,
they go through the different ways of learning, the different styles of learning, and when you get down to like teaching somebody what you've been taught, actually
mm,
you get a retention of like 90% or something, was like a statistic I saw. That if we really want people to really learn something, they've actually
yeah.
got to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
they can hear it and they can be assisted, and there's that, but at some point
Mm,
we just got to go, you got to do this,
yeah.
because it's as
Yeah.
they try to teach other people that actually
Yeah.
they'll learn more about it more deeply. And it's
Yeah. Well,
something
there's loads in this.
as
Mm,
some is this something even say to my kids. I said it today when I was teaching my kids. I said, when you go home and your parents say to you, "What did you learn at school today?" I say, don't just
mm,
say to them, "Nothing." What did you do?
yeah.
Nowhere. I says, take it as an opportunity to try and see if you can remember something from class. And because I know if they try and do that either with each other, it as
Mm,
peers, or do it with their
mm,
parents because parents have asked, I know what has been taught in class is going to go that little bit deeper.
yeah. Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, Jesus understood this, didn't he? And Jesus, and we need to understand it. In all five of these ministries we're talking about today, I think what we've just said is that the essence of it. That's part of this usurping. It's part of this upside downness, that we're actually truly about equipping others. And we need to understand the mazel, but also what you said there about getting people to learn by doing.
Yeah.
And learn by chatting, learn by discussing, learn in
Yeah.
community. These are all things that Jesus did.
Yes.
We think we've discovered them today, but actually Jesus did them two millennia ago.
Yes. Yes. That's good.
That was evangelist, wasn't it? Should we go on to prophetic?
Yeah, let's do prophetic.
Prophet?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So my understanding of prophetic, it's a much needed one. It's probably the one that I don't know whether you think this, Ed, because obviously you're very much flowing in prophetic stuff, but it's the one that tends to be left to the end. I think there has been a bit of a trend around apostolic stuff, but I think the prophetic is probably going to be the last one to really be embraced by the wider church. And the reason for that is it's uncomfortable, isn't it? It's truth is uncomfortable. So it's almost like subliminally we're kind of leaving that one to the end.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll have pastors, teachers. Yes, we'll have evangelists. Yes, we might have some apostolic people. We understand that. But the prophetic. So I think, and we're missing out because it is the fifth tool in God's toolbox. And, how can we kind of, what is it? Because it's God using people to speak. And that can be done in a whole lot of different creative ways, can't it? And in a way, Ed, you know a lot more about this sort of ministry than I do. But prophetic, I guess the prophetic times I've had in the past, where I've stood up for something, I've been in a meeting and I've just said something that everybody looks at you a little bit weird,
Yeah.
But then they nod. But it takes them a good half hour before they nod.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, what you said was right, Steve. Yeah, that really does feel like that's God's word for us now. It's kind of speaking with courage and boldness.
Yeah.
And sometimes learning to communicate that message that you've got from God in a really creative way. I mean, the Old Testament prophets did all kinds of performance art, didn't they?
Yes.
Who was the one that lay on his side naked for a day or something?
It's either I think it's Isaiah or Jeremiah.
I'm not saying we should do that one.
No, because nobody wants to see this body naked.
Exactly. It would just put people off all around the world. But the whole concept that of performance art, that's what I mean about performance art. It's about communicating something in incredibly powerful ways. And you think, oh, there's some truth, there's some God truth.
But if we take your upside down method, it's not just being the one who's speaking the truth, but helping people find their voice and finding their ear so they can hear God, and they can be that voice as well. So it's,
Nice.
again, these are all dual. I think if we take the usurp thing, I think it, again, that might not be the right word. We're
I'm going to
finding
look it up.
there's a service that goes on, because, and this is, as I said, I've spent a long time in this thing with the prophetic, but for me, that when I was talking to my friend the other day about the difference. What's the difference between somebody who's really good with a gift of prophetic? They can prophesy really well, they can encourage, and a prophet. What's the difference? Because if we can all prophesy, why do we need prophets? If Paul says potentially you can all prophesy, then the main function of the prophet is now stripped away from the Old Testament, which was to speak on behalf of God. So what is it then? And I think the whole usurp thing is really important. It's actually, when I see people transition from, they want to get off the platform and they want to get into people's lives and start equipping them to hear God for themselves, I think that's the transition with somebody who's not just being prophetic, but somebody who's stepping into something that's more fatherly in service and equipping other people to do, rather than just them doing it themselves. And for me, that's one of the transitions of heart, because when I started, prophesying, I just wanted the mic and I wanted to get on the platform, or I wanted to hit the streets, and it was about me taking my gift and what I knew and applying that gift. But my passion in this past 6 years is I would like to do that less and help you more. And I think you could apply that attitude to all of the gifts as well, or all of the fivefold. Really is, going back right to the beginning of this conversation, maybe it's about getting off the platform and getting into people's lives and helping them to step into something, whether it's helping them hear God, whether it's helping them be a storyteller, whether it's helping them be a catalyst, whether it's helping them care for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I've just looked up usurp, Ed, because it was irritating me.
Okay.
I don't know. And I think we're using it, or I'm using it badly. Usurp is to take a position of power or importance illegally or by force.
Okay.
So in a way, it's kind of the opposite of usurping. Whatever.
So
what we're talking about here?
Yes, it's the antonym.
Oh, there is a word. I don't know what it is. So it's basically unusurping yourself. It's getting off the throne. It's a little bit like in Revelation, isn't it, where the people with crowns, they lay their crowns before him. They lay their crowns, and it's like, if you're given positions, you should be looking to get to kind of to undo that, to be upside down. So usurping is definitely the wrong word. It's actually the opposite, what we're looking at.
Dethroning,
to get
maybe.
Off. Dethroning. That's
dethroning.
Nice. Yeah, dethrone yourself. Yeah. And that's a kingdom thing, isn't it? To dethrone yourself.
It's what Jesus did. If Philippians chapter 2 is the ultimate example of dethroning. Jesus gave up all of the entitlement that it meant to be God, and stripped himself of all that and came in the image of a servant. And Jesus is the embodiment of all of fivefold ministry. He is the apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher. That's who he is. He's all of that. And so if his thing was, I'm going to dethrone myself and go and serve people who will reject me and despise me and will not necessarily receive me, but I'm not working for that. I'm working to model a different kingdom. I think for me, there's something in this, in that picture there.
That's real powerful. So prophetic ministry is much, much needed and needs to be welcomed in. And we talked about the pastor prophetic kind of tension earlier on, and I think that's quite key, because in traditional churches, certainly pastors still hold power, don't they?
Yes.
And they tend to be the leaders. The leader tends to be pastor, which is interesting. Isn't it? That the leader is the pastor. Why can't the leader be the evangelist, or why can't the leader be some of the other ministries? But so that the classic thing, I think pastors need to just scarily, because pastors love safety for their flock, and that's the way it is. That's lovely to be like that. But actually, they do need to be bold and courageous and welcome some prophetic voices into their midst.
Safety doesn't produce growth. No. Safety doesn't produce growth. And so those pastoral and teaching ministries are going to be geared towards safety. And we need to have a mix of all
Yeah.
of those to be healthy. Going back and beginning of the conversation, this holistic thing, we need all of that in our lives. We don't just need a pastor in our lives. We need that ability to learn. We need that ability to love, that ability to reach out, that ability to hear God, and that ability to do new stuff. So yeah,
It's brilliant.
yeah. Well,
So we've got
I don't want to keep you too long because we've been at an hour already.
yeah.
I would like to give you sort of a final thought and then bring you back for another one, because I feel like there's more in you, Steve, that I want to squeeze out of you in the nicest possible way. But I also don't want to go too long on the one podcast, So I just want to just release you, just to bring a final thought, something in your heart that you around this subject, and we'll yeah.
Jesus always brings freedom, doesn't he? And so this is supposed to free people up. So if you find that these labels are squashing you, you need to be thinking about using the more what was your thing again? Verbiage. Getting a lot more verbiage about your role. I would say that, because then you will find a little bit more freedom, I think, to be who you are. So embrace the hybridity of it all. Embrace the verbiage of it all. Embrace the seasons of thinking about these things as well. And I think in those three concepts, I think you find a little bit more, you'll find God at work, but you'll also find a lot more freedom for yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. So, Steve, thank you very much for joining. It's been awesome. This has just been like a normal conversation just between me and you, just with a record press, to be honest. So no, I really appreciate your time and just your perspective, and so, I really appreciate today. And everyone who's watching, bless you for watching, and we'll catch you on the next Understanding Fivefold Ministry. Bye-bye.